In a modest, cluttered studio nestled in the corner of a bustling city, a man sat hunched over a canvas, lost in the strokes of his paintbrush. His name was Marcus, and while his name wasn't yet well known in the art world, it was his work that spoke volumes. The small studio was barely big enough to hold all the canvases, brushes, and tubes of paint that surrounded him. But this was his sanctuary, a space where he could pour his heart into each piece of artwork he created. Marcus was in his early 30s, with dark eyes full of determination but also a quiet sadness, a reflection of the many years spent in obscurity, fighting to be recognized for his talent. His modest lifestyle mirrored his humble beginnings. He didn't have the luxury of living in a fancy apartment or dining at high-end restaurants. He survived on small savings, odd jobs, and a tight budget, but he had something that money couldn't buy, a passion for his art. Every day, Marcus would wake up before sunrise, not for a 9-to-5 job, but to make his art. His paintings reflected his life, the emotions he experienced, and the world he saw, a world filled with color, hope, and beauty, even in the darkest corners. Though he painted with fervor, Marcus had never truly realized the power of his own work. His art was his escape, his personal journey, and he hadn't yet tapped into the potential that lay beneath the surface. He often sold his pieces for small amounts, barely covering the cost of supplies, but that didn't deter him. Art was not about money to Marcus, it was about expression, communication, and, above all, the desire to tell a story, his story. But as the years went by, something inside of him started to shift. He began to yearn for more. He wanted to be seen, to have his work showcased in galleries, to be celebrated by those who understood the depth of his creations. Yet, every attempt to get his art into the right hands had ended in rejection. The few galleries he visited either didn't see his potential or simply dismissed him because of his appearance and background. Marcus knew he had the talent, but he also knew that in the art world, it wasn't just about talent, it was about connections, status, and being in the right place at the right time. And while he hadn't yet realized it, Marcus was on the brink of something much greater than he could imagine. With a new determination, he began planning his next move. His dream of having his work seen by a larger audience was growing stronger. He knew that sooner or later, the right person would see his art and recognize its true worth. Until then, he would continue working, pouring everything he had into each brushstroke, not knowing that the journey he was about to take would forever change his life, and the life of the gallery owner who once dismissed him. The day had come. Marcus had spent weeks gathering his best pieces, carefully packing them, and preparing himself for a new opportunity. He had heard about the prestigious gallery, Vanguard Arts, known for its exclusivity and its knack for discovering rare talent. This could be the breakthrough he'd been waiting for, the chance to finally be noticed. Dressed in simple clothes, Marcus walked through the sleek glass doors of the gallery. The minimalist decor of Vanguard Arts made the space feel cold and imposing. The sharp lines of white walls and the spotless floors only emphasized the prestige of the place, and for a moment, Marcus felt a pang of doubt. He wasn't sure if he truly belonged here, but he had come this far and couldn't turn back now. The receptionist, a well-groomed young woman, barely glanced up when he approached. "How can I help you?" she asked, her tone distant. "I have some of my artwork here," Marcus replied, holding up a portfolio. "I was hoping to meet with the gallery owner, Mr. Sullivan. I'd like to show him my work." The receptionist hesitated, her eyes scanning his unpolished appearance. She raised an eyebrow, but picked up the phone and dialed a number. Moments later, she directed him to a private office at the back of the gallery. Inside the office sat Mr. Sullivan, the owner of Vanguard Arts, a middle-aged man with a sharp suit and an air of superiority. His slicked-back hair and thin glasses gave him the appearance of someone who was used to power, used to calling the shots. He glanced up from his desk, sizing up Marcus the moment he stepped into the room. "What can I do for you?" Mr. Sullivan asked, a slight smirk playing on his lips. Marcus placed the portfolio on the desk, carefully opening it to reveal his artwork. Each piece was vibrant, filled with emotion and detail, reflecting his life's journey. As he spoke of his inspiration and the stories behind the paintings, Mr. Sullivan barely paid attention. His gaze flicked from the artwork to Marcus, his face a picture of mild amusement. Well, Mr. Sullivan said, pushing the portfolio aside with a condescending smile. You've got a unique style. But frankly, this is a bit pedestrian, don't you think? Marcus faltered for a moment, his heart sinking. He had hoped for a chance, a real opportunity, but he wasn't prepared for this. Unoriginal, Mr. Sullivan continued, leaning back in his chair. It's been done before. Nothing new here. These just feel like the work of someone still learning, trying to mimic the masters, but not quite getting it. The words stung, and Marcus felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He had poured his soul into these pieces, and yet here was this man, dismissing them so easily. Mr. Sullivan continued to list the flaws in each painting, how they were too abstract, too colorful, too bold. He mocked Marcus's use of color, calling it garish and unfit for a gallery of distinction. I'm sorry, Mr. Sullivan said with a bored sigh, but I don't think we can help you. I suggest you try one of those smaller, less discerning galleries. You know, the ones that showcase up-and-coming artists. Maybe they'll appreciate your vision. Marcus stood still for a moment, the words ringing in his ears. His dreams felt as if they were crumbling in front of him. But then, he took a deep breath, gathered his things, and closed the portfolio without a word. He gave a polite nod, hiding the hurt and disappointment he felt inside. Thank you for your time, Marcus said quietly, turning toward the door. He left the office, his steps slow but steady. As he exited the gallery, the world felt heavy around him. He had expected rejection, but he hadn't expected to be mocked so openly. The gallery owner's words echoed in his mind, unoriginal, pedestrian, not good enough. But Marcus kept his head held high as he stepped into the street. He didn't need to defend his work to someone who couldn't see its value. He wasn't about to reveal the secret of his success, not to someone who couldn't even recognize it when it was right in front of him. He would continue on, finding new ways to push forward, to refine his craft. The world had its eyes closed, but one day, it would see. One day, they would all see months passed since Marcus's disappointing visit to Vanguard Arts. The sting of rejection never truly faded, but something inside him shifted. His resolve hardened, and he threw himself deeper into his work. He didn't need validation from people who couldn't see his worth. Instead, he focused on perfecting his craft, pushing the boundaries of his creativity. Each painting became more refined, more expressive, capturing the raw, untamed emotions he had bottled up over the years. He still lived a simple life, but the peace in his heart came from knowing that his art was evolving. Yet, even in his private world, Marcus was unaware of the storm brewing around his work. One day, an art collector, who had been quietly watching the underground art scene, stumbled upon Marcus's pieces at a small local exhibition. The collector, a wealthy investor with an eye for unique, high-value art, immediately saw something extraordinary in Marcus's work. The emotion, the depth, the layers, it was all there, hiding behind the unassuming exterior of a humble artist. The collector, intrigued and captivated by the paintings, bought several of Marcus's pieces on the spot, but what he didn't know was that he was holding something far more valuable than anyone had anticipated. The artworks were placed in a private auction for elite buyers, a secret circle of the world's wealthiest collectors. It had been months since Marcus's visit to Vanguard Arts, and in that time, the world had changed for him. He had become an artist of incredible renown, his work now displayed in prestigious galleries, his paintings sought after by the wealthiest collectors around the globe. The success he had once dreamed of was now a reality, and his name was becoming synonymous with innovation and brilliance in the art world. Yet, something in him stirred. Despite his newfound fame and fortune, Marcus couldn't shake the memory of the gallery that had rejected him, the gallery owner who had mocked his work and dismissed him without a second thought. It had stung, but now, with the knowledge of his success and the value of his creations, Marcus felt that the time had come to return. One crisp morning, he made his decision. It wasn't about revenge, it was about showing the world, and Mr. Sullivan in particular, the true worth of his art. He had been underestimated, and now it was time for him to show just how wrong the gallery owner had been. This time, Marcus wasn't alone. He arrived at the gallery accompanied by his assistant, a few of his art advisors, and an entourage of photographers. His presence commanded attention as he stepped confidently into Vanguard Arts, the same gallery that had once turned him away with a cold, dismissive attitude. The moment he entered, the receptionist, who had no idea who he was, looked up from her desk, her gaze lingering on him for a brief second. She seemed to recognize the air of confidence that he carried but didn't make the connection. Marcus, however, was unbothered. He knew exactly where he was going and what he was there to do. Walking past the receptionist, he made his way straight to the office of Mr. Sullivan, who was speaking with an associate. As he opened the door, Mr. Sullivan glanced up, his eyes narrowing with confusion at the sight of Marcus, dressed in a sharp, tailored suit and exuding an air of self-assuredness that commanded respect. "Can I help you?" Mr. Sullivan asked, his voice laced with a hint of indifference. Clearly, he had no idea who this well-dressed man was or why he was here. Marcus stood tall in the doorway, his presence filling the room. With a quiet smile, he said, "I believe you remember me. I'm the artist who was here several months ago. You may recall my work." Mr. Sullivan blinked, trying to place the man before him. He looked him up and down, his mind racing as he tried to recall the artist he had once dismissed. He saw no immediate recognition in Marcus's face, just the same confident stance, the same quiet intensity, but there was something different now, something more refined. "Ah, yes," Mr. Sullivan said, now with a forced smile. "Of course, I remember. You're the one with those interesting pieces." Marcus didn't flinch at the dismissive tone. He had long since learned how to navigate such condescension, and now he was in control of the situation. "I've come back," Marcus said, calmly, "because I have something to show you." Mr. Sullivan looked at him skeptically. "Oh? What's that?" Without saying another word, Marcus opened his briefcase and revealed a portfolio of his most recent works, pieces that were now widely celebrated, some of them having sold for millions. He placed them on the desk before Mr. Sullivan, allowing the weight of the moment to sink in. The gallery owner's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages, his expression changing from smug indifference to one of disbelief. Each piece was more stunning than the last, more original, more powerful. The colors were vivid, the brushstrokes bold, and the emotions that bled from the canvas were unmistakable. This was the work of a true master, a far cry from the so-called unoriginal pieces he had mocked just months ago. As Mr. Sullivan looked up from the portfolio, his face flushed with embarrassment. He had underestimated Marcus, he had dismissed the artist as nothing more than an amateur, and now here he was, standing in front of him, his art worth more than the gallery itself. Marcus, seeing the recognition in the gallery owner's eyes, felt a surge of quiet satisfaction. But he didn't gloat. There was no need. The value of his work had already been proven in ways that words could never do justice to. "You know," Marcus said, his voice calm but carrying weight, "a lot has changed since I was last here. My work is now being shown in galleries around the world, and collectors are paying millions for pieces like these." Mr. Sullivan stammered, trying to regain his composure. I didn't realize. I mean, I had no idea. Your work, it's remarkable." "I was wrong." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was one of quiet resolve. "I'm not here to prove anything to you, Mr. Sullivan. I've already moved on. But I wanted you to see, sometimes, the true value of something isn't always obvious at first." With that, Marcus turned to leave, his entourage following close behind. As he stepped back into the world outside the gallery, he felt a deep sense of peace. He had returned, not to claim revenge, but to prove something much more important, that talent, dedication, and belief in oneself would always rise above ignorance and disrespect. And as the door to Vanguard Arts closed behind him, Marcus knew that his journey was far from over. He had a whole world to conquer. As the door to Vanguard Arts clicked shut behind Marcus, the weight of the moment lingered. He didn't just walk away with his dignity intact, he carried with him something much more powerful: control over his own destiny. But there was one final piece of unfinished business. The gallery owner, Mr. Sullivan, still had no idea who Marcus truly was, and Marcus felt it was time to make that clear. The next morning, Marcus walked back into Vanguard Arts, this time with a different air about him. No entourage, no cameras, no grand displays. He entered the gallery as the man who had quietly changed the art world, ready to face Mr. Sullivan again, but now on his own terms. The receptionist glanced up at him, this time with an expression that was almost apologetic, though she didn't yet know who he was. "Good morning. Can I help you?" she asked politely. Marcus simply nodded. "I'd like to speak to Mr. Sullivan again." She quickly buzzed the office, and a few moments later, the door to the back office opened. Mr. Sullivan appeared, still looking a bit disheveled from the day before, but his demeanor immediately shifted when he saw Marcus standing there with a calm, assured presence. "Ah, you again," Mr. Sullivan said, his voice tinged with awkwardness. "I wasn't expecting." "I think it's time we talk," Marcus interjected smoothly, his tone measured but firm. "But this time it's not about my work. It's about who I really am." Mr. Sullivan's brow furrowed, clearly confused, as Marcus stepped into the office. "What do you mean? I thought we cleared things up yesterday." "Your art is, well, it's incredible. I've learned a lot from—" "That's not what I mean," Marcus said, cutting him off with a calm but undeniable presence. "What I mean is, you have no idea who you were talking to when you turned me away. I didn't just show you paintings, I showed you the future of art. And it's mine." The gallery owner stared at him, still unsure where this conversation was headed. Marcus reached into his briefcase, pulling out a portfolio of the sold works, only this time, he added a few auction catalogs, press clippings, and photographs. As Mr. Sullivan flipped through them, his eyes widened in disbelief. The prices, the names of the buyers, the global press attention, every page revealed something that Marcus had become in just a few short months: a millionaire artist, a cultural force, a man whose art was now worth more than entire collections that galleries like Vanguard Arts could only dream of. Each painting sold for millions. Auction houses across the globe were clamoring for more of his work. His pieces were now in the collections of some of the world's most influential figures. "You," Mr. Sullivan stammered, his face turning pale. "You mean, you're the one? The artist whose work just sold at?" Marcus nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "Yes. I'm the artist whose work you so casually dismissed, and now I am one of the most sought-after names in the art world." Mr. Sullivan's face shifted from disbelief to embarrassment, then to something that could only be described as deep regret. His words from months ago echoed in his mind: unoriginal, pedestrian, not good enough. Now, those words seemed hollow, stupid, and shameful. He had mocked the very person who was now transforming the industry. I'm so sorry," Mr. Sullivan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had no idea. I didn't understand. I can't believe." Marcus held up a hand, silencing him. "It's all right, Mr. Sullivan. I'm not here to rub it in your face. I'm here to make a point. When you look at someone, you can't judge their potential based on their appearance, their background, or any other factor that has nothing to do with their talent. And trust me, I've been underestimated my entire life." Mr. Sullivan's embarrassment deepened, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I didn't come here to dwell on the past," Marcus continued. "I came here because I have plans. Big plans. I'm buying art galleries. Starting with this one." Mr. Sullivan froze. "What?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "You heard me," Marcus said, with a small, knowing smile. "I want to invest in art spaces that will celebrate and elevate the artists who have been overlooked, the ones who have been told they aren't good enough, just like I was. Vanguard Arts will be the first gallery in my new collection." For a moment, Mr. Sullivan was speechless. He stared at Marcus, processing the weight of the words. This was no longer the young artist who had humbly walked in asking for a chance. This was a powerful force in the art world, someone whose presence demanded respect. And now, the very place that had dismissed him would be owned by him. Marcus stood up to leave, but not before turning to Mr. Sullivan and delivering the final message. I want you to think long and hard about what you just witnessed, because it's a lesson that will stay with you for the rest of your life. You never know the true value of a person until you take the time to see them for who they really are. This isn't just about art. It's about seeing potential where others see nothing. And with that, Marcus left the office, the weight of his words hanging in the air. He had revealed his identity, and in doing so, had solidified his place in the art world as someone who would not only thrive but change the landscape forever. The deal was swift, almost too swift for Mr. Sullivan to comprehend. Within weeks, Marcus had secured the funds, and the ownership of Vanguard Arts officially changed hands. Marcus took over operations, bringing with him a new vision, one that would forever alter the course of the gallery's future and challenge the power dynamics in the art world. On the day the transfer of ownership was finalized, Marcus stood at the entrance of the gallery, surveying the space that had once rejected him. It no longer held the same cold, elitist aura that he had first encountered. This time, it was different. This gallery was no longer about exclusivity or showcasing only the works of the so-called elite. It was a place where raw, untapped talent could thrive, a haven for artists who had been overlooked or dismissed by the mainstream. Marcus had big plans. The first changes came quickly. He revamped the interior, transforming the gallery into a modern, welcoming space where artists from all backgrounds could display their work. There were no more barriers, no more gatekeepers. Anyone with talent and vision had a chance to be seen. He hired a new team, curators, critics, and managers who shared his commitment to championing diverse voices in art. No longer would the art world be defined by the old guard, by those who believed that only a select few had the right to succeed. The very first exhibit Marcus held under his leadership was a resounding success. The gallery was packed with people, collectors, critics, and artists alike, eager to witness the transformation. The new artists showcased were those who had once been relegated to the sidelines, their work often ignored or dismissed. But now, thanks to Marcus, their pieces were front and center, celebrated for their originality and passion. As the weeks went by, Vanguard Arts became a beacon of change in the art world. Its reputation grew, drawing attention from collectors, investors, and art lovers worldwide. And as for Marcus, he didn't stop at just one gallery. With his newfound wealth, he acquired more galleries in major cities, each one adopting the same progressive vision. The art world was beginning to realize that things had shifted. The tables had turned. Meanwhile, Mr. Sullivan, once the powerful owner of the gallery, now found himself on the other side of the equation. As part of the terms of the sale, he had been offered a position at Vanguard Arts, but not as the boss. No, now he worked under Marcus. He was just another employee, his role downgraded to that of a curator, managing exhibitions and assisting with the day-to-day operations. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The man who had once held all the power, who had mocked Marcus and dismissed his potential, now found himself answering to him. The role reversal was something Mr. Sullivan had never expected. He was no longer the gatekeeper of the art world, he was merely a cog in the machine of Marcus's grand vision. Each day, as he moved through the gallery, overseeing the work of other artists, Mr. Sullivan couldn't escape the sting of his own arrogance. He had once thought himself above Marcus, but now he saw the full impact of his misjudgment. The artists he had once disregarded were now part of an artistic revolution, and Marcus was the figurehead of that change. He couldn't help but feel the weight of his previous disrespect. But the hardest part for Mr. Sullivan wasn't just the role reversal, it was the realization that he had been blind to something far greater than his own pride. Marcus's success wasn't just about money or fame, it was about redefining the art world, about seeing the worth in those who had been overlooked. And as he worked under Marcus, Mr. Sullivan began to truly understand the magnitude of what had happened, the change that Marcus had brought to the industry, the future of art that was now being shaped. Despite his discomfort, Mr. Sullivan couldn't deny the profound shift that had occurred. He saw how artists were now treated with respect, their work celebrated for its uniqueness and creativity. He saw how Marcus had built a network of galleries that embraced the diversity of art in ways he had never imagined. And slowly, as the days passed, he started to gain a new respect for the man he had once dismissed as unoriginal. For Marcus, the changes were just beginning. He didn't take pleasure in the downfall of Mr. Sullivan, but he took immense satisfaction in knowing that his vision had won. He had proven that talent, vision, and authenticity would always rise to the top. The art world, once ruled by elitism and narrow definitions of success, was now being reshaped in a way that gave space to all voices. As the new owner of Vanguard Arts and a rising figure in the global art market, Marcus continued to build his empire of galleries, each one more successful than the last. He was no longer the artist knocking on doors. Now, he was the one who decided which doors would open. And as for Mr. Sullivan, he couldn't help but reflect every day on the painful but powerful lesson he had learned. Never underestimate the potential of someone simply because they don't fit the mold of what you expect. Marcus had shown him that, in the most profound way possible. The days and weeks following Marcus's takeover of Vanguard Arts had been a whirlwind. The gallery was thriving under his leadership, its reputation spreading across the art world like wildfire. New artists were being celebrated, their voices amplified in ways that would have been unimaginable just a few months ago. Marcus had not only proven the value of his own work, but had created a platform for others who, like him, had once been dismissed or overlooked. But for Mr. Sullivan, the journey had taken a different turn. He spent his days curating exhibits, working diligently behind the scenes, but his mind often drifted back to the past, to the time when he had been the one in control, when he had felt secure in his own judgments and superiority. There were moments when he would catch himself staring at Marcus, now firmly in charge, and the truth would hit him all over again. He had underestimated the very person who had the power to change everything. The harsh lesson had been slow to sink in. It wasn't just about the money or the fame that Marcus had earned, it was about the principles that had guided him all along: persistence, humility, and a deep belief in his craft. Marcus had never needed to tear others down to prove his worth. He had let his talent speak for itself, and in doing so, had built an empire based not on exclusivity, but on the celebration of diverse voices in art. One late afternoon, as Mr. Sullivan walked through the now transformed halls of Vanguard Arts, something shifted in him. The gallery was abuzz with excitement, the energy palpable as artists and visitors milled about, discussing the latest exhibit. He paused by a painting, a striking piece by a young artist who had once been turned away by the very gallery Mr. Sullivan had once run. The artist's work, raw and unpolished yet undeniably powerful, was a reminder of what had been missed and what Marcus had fought for. Mr. Sullivan's gaze lingered on the piece, and as he took it in, he couldn't help but think back to the day when he had scoffed at Marcus's paintings. He had dismissed them as unworthy, calling them unoriginal and pedestrian. And now, looking at the room full of successful, celebrated artists, each one a testament to the vision Marcus had implemented, he realized how wrong he had been. It wasn't just the art I missed, he thought, it was the potential. I didn't see what was right in front of me, and in doing so, I helped shut the door on what could have been an extraordinary opportunity. But even in his regret, Mr. Sullivan knew he had been given a second chance. Marcus had never treated him with animosity, never sought to crush him in his moment of defeat. Instead, he had extended a hand and given him a role within his new vision. Marcus hadn't just taken control of Vanguard Arts, he had offered Mr. Sullivan a chance to redeem himself, to become a part of something bigger than either of them had ever imagined. For Marcus, this wasn't about proving a point or basking in revenge. It was about creating something lasting, a legacy that would give other overlooked artists the opportunities they deserved. He had never been motivated by spite, his drive had always been rooted in a passion to share his vision with the world and give others the platform to do the same. As Marcus continued to expand his collection of galleries, he began to mentor young, up-and-coming artists who had faced the same struggles he had. He knew what it was like to be dismissed, to be told that his art didn't fit the mold of what people expected. And so, he made it his mission to offer guidance and support to those who might otherwise have been left behind. His mentorship wasn't just about teaching technique, it was about helping these artists believe in their potential, just as he had to learn to do for himself. Marcus made a point to meet with these artists, providing them with the resources and connections they needed to showcase their work. He was hands-on, involved in every step of the process, ensuring that every artist had the opportunity to rise. He often told them the same thing his mentors had told him: never let anyone tell you your art isn't worth something. Keep pushing forward, keep believing in your work. The full circle was complete. The man who had once been dismissed as a nobody was now a powerful figure in the art world, not only shaping the industry but also helping others rise from the shadows. His story wasn't just one of success, it was a testament to the power of persistence, humility, and a belief in one's own worth. The rejection he had faced was just the beginning of his journey, and now, as he mentored the next generation of artists, he became living proof that talent, when nurtured and recognized, could change lives. As for Mr. Sullivan, he no longer felt the sting of regret so sharply. He had learned his lesson the hard way, but in doing so, he had been given a new perspective, a chance to work under someone who had taught him the true meaning of respect and opportunity. He had watched Marcus transform from an artist striving for recognition into a force that would forever change the art world. And in the quiet moments, when he reflected on his own role in this story, he understood that his biggest mistake had led to his greatest lesson: never underestimate someone based on their appearance or background, for you might just miss the next great thing.